Welcome back, everyone, to OpenLine. A very interesting topic tonight, a very tough topic to talk about, but one we should all learn more about. We're talking about human trafficking. Happens all over the world, and yes, it happens right here in Nashville. We have with us Derri Smith, the State Director for Not For Sale Tennessee. We were talking before the break about how many of the people that are caught up in this, most of the time it's the sex trade, quite frankly, and we talked about that it's people on the fringes. But you wanted to add something to that. Meaning people on the fringes, meaning low-income areas where there's not going to be a big search for someone who goes missing, children who run away, that kind of thing. But what did you want to add to that?
Well, you just have to remember that traffickers are motivated by profit. I read recently of a trafficking ring that was targeting girls in rural Minnesota, specifically because they were sweet and wholesome. And sweet, wholesome girls who are virgins bring the highest prices on the streets. So traffickers do have motivation to go after some of those places where there's a little more risk. A trafficker will recruit in a mall, at a school, at a playground, in a theater, anywhere children can be found.
And I mean, you say that and it's horrifying, it's terrible. Is this problem growing, or now that there are organizations like yours, people, I think, at least have heard about human trafficking. The past administration did a lot with it. It's certainly something the UN is focused on. Human trafficking is something people are talking about. Is this problem growing, or are we getting our arms around it and we're finally beginning to do something about it?
I think it's probably a little of both. We're just opening a Pandora's box. We really didn't know what we were looking for. It wasn't on our mental grid. So I do think there is that element. But also some technology and communication, some of the advances in those fields have made this an easier way to make money, frankly. Just as I said before, because it's computer-based, you don't have to have a shop with a sign out front. You don't have to have a girl parading in a seedy part of town. You can just put an ad up on the computer, and they do, and you're open for business.
I mean, God forbid this should happen to someone who's watching. Of course they're terrified, of course they're brainwashed, but our police departments, you feel like if you can make a call to a police department, are they fairly well trained and prepared for a call like this, and you feel like that could make a difference? Or what do you think about that? Well,
we're very fortunate in Nashville that our Vice Squad is educated and aware, but that doesn't mean the run-of-the-mill policeman is, or the one in a rural area. So the best thing for anyone who's a victim, or anyone who suspects they know of a victim, is to call the national hotline number. Health and Human Services has a national hotline number 24/7, and that's 888-3737, 888-3737, 888, and if somebody will call that, they will get somebody right out to check on that case.
So there we have the numbers on the screen for the national hotline and also for Not For Sale Tennessee. Not For Sale Tennessee is obviously a state organization. Are there organizations just like yours all over the country?
Yes.
So there's, okay, well those are some good numbers. We'll put them up again later. But when you're talking about this, I think people again think, okay, this happens in big cities. And we've established, okay, it happens in Nashville. And that's surprising, but I guess understandable. What about in rural areas?
Well, that's exactly right. It does happen in any metropolitan area. I mean, it's a matter of supply and demand. You have children, you have people who want those children for their perverse purposes. But what really surprised me is to learn that it's increasingly a problem in rural and suburban areas. And that's because traffickers realize that there are fewer law enforcement resources there. The law enforcement officers are unlikely to have been trained in trafficking. The neighbors are not likely to notice, or if they do notice, to interpret what's going on in that suspicious activity. And because it's computer-based, it can be anywhere. I went to a concert by Natalie Grant not very long ago, and she talked about the uncovering of a trafficking ring of young girls less than 1.5 miles from her Brentwood home.
Really? And that video you showed, it indicated if you're not seeing it, you're not looking.
Yes.
Which, that's quite a statement. I mean, I hate to even consider that possibility, but when you're saying 1.5 miles from your Brentwood home, it really is, it sounds like it really is all around us.
It is. There's probably somebody that each of us is encountering, at least one somebody in our daily life. And that's why it's important to educate ourselves. One important thing that people can do is learn what some of the red flags are, some of the ways you can identify a victim. If people go to that website, notforsaletn.org, on our Get Involved page, we have a link to an excellent list put out by the Salvation Army that is just all the red flags. And you start adding red flags up, you might think it might be time to call that hotline number and see if something's going on here. And that might be somebody you know who always seems to be under the control and surveillance of someone else. Or maybe they don't seem to have control of their money or their IDs. Maybe they keep their head down and they don't make eye contact. Maybe they always seem to be working long hours, or they live with their employer. Just look down that list and educate yourself so that when you see these suspicious signs, you might know next time what you're looking at.
But where would you see that? I mean, when I hear the term trafficking, human trafficking, I figure they are locked away in a room and they don't see anybody but those who maybe pay to go see them. They're not out walking around with their head down. I mean, they are locked away, forcibly detained, and inaccessible.
That's just not true. That is sometimes true, but as I said before, sometimes they will be working in plain sight, but because it's not on our mental grid and we're not looking for it, it doesn't arouse suspicion, and so victims aren't identified. And one of the really important things we need to do is start training the people who either are likely to see the suspicious signs of trafficking or who are likely to come into first contact with trafficking victims. That might be social workers, pastors, priests, teachers, cable installers when they go in houses, postal workers. They all need training so that they know what they're seeing next time they see it.
So we've established that obviously a majority of this, I guess, would be in the sex trade. But what are some of the other jobs they might be doing out in plain sight that people are just overlooking?
Sometimes you would go into a restaurant. For example, David Batstone, who started this organization, had slavery just fall into his lap. He'd never heard of it. And he had a favorite Indian restaurant he and his wife went to all the time. He was shocked when he opened the newspaper one day to see it was the center of a trafficking ring. It never crossed his mind that the children who were waiting on the tables and washing the dishes weren't just family members of the restaurant owner. Instead, they had been brought in from India, 500 of them, and put out into labor, farm work, restaurants. There was an episode on Law and Order not long ago that showed another example where a rich family went to Haiti and bought a child and passed that child off as their adopted child. In reality, that child slept in a closet, worked from dawn till dusk, had no education, was malnourished, was beaten for any infraction, real or imagined, and in many cases, if the master's whim deemed it, for sex as well.
Well, that's profoundly disturbing. You started talking about restaurants. I mean, is there a case like that here in Nashville?
Yes, there have been labor cases, although the biggest cases that we've uncovered so far have been in the sex trade.
So there have been restaurant cases here in Nashville?
Yeah, there have. I don't know whether it was a restaurant, but it was labor related.
Labor related, okay.